Content note: this episode contains candid discussion of childhood sexual abuse, incest, rape, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. Please take care of yourself as you listen. The RAINN National Sexual Assault Hotline is available 24/7 at rainn.org, RAINN.org, or 800-656-4673. Welcome to Babes in Bookland, your women's memoir podcast. I'm your host, Alex Franca. Today, I'm sitting down with author Andrea Leeb, whose memoir, Such a Pretty Picture, is an act of profound courage, tracing her childhood, her survival, and the long, non-linear road back to herself. She writes with the precision of someone who has done the hard work and the grace of someone who genuinely wants to help others. We talk about silence, about the complicated love we hold for people who failed us, and about what healing actually looks like, not as a destination, but as a practice. This is not an easy listen, but it is a necessary one. And if you have lived something like what Andrea describes, I hope this episode finds you and reminds you that your story is real and that you are not alone. There is something sacred about what happens when a survivor speaks and someone truly listens. Today, we listen. We bear witness. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Alex. It's nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on Babes in Bookland. I feel like your memoir is a life raft. It's a beacon of light and hope for women and all people who have gone through their own experiences with sexual assault and abuse. Your honesty, your vulnerability, your evolution was beautiful to read. And though this book was heartbreaking, I mean, that doesn't even begin to cover it, I left it feeling hopeful and in awe of your strength and compassion. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and I have no doubt that its impact has been and will continue to be extremely meaningful and far-reaching.
Well, thank you. Those are wonderful words to hear. I think that's, you've summed up why I wanted to write the book. Not that I wanted to necessarily break hearts, but I was, to give a talisman for healing and also to build awareness on this issue. So really, really happy that you said that. Those are lovely words. I think I'm going to listen to them all the time.
Well, you can listen to this episode whenever you want.
I think so.
Okay, so before we get into your memoir, let's talk about the process. Walk me through that decision of sitting down and actually saying, like, I need to put this on paper. I need to get this into the world.
So it was a long time coming. I have an MFA in creative writing. I've been writing most of my life on and off at different levels. I wrote fiction before. I always, and I never intended to write memoir. I never intended to put this particular story, the story of my childhood, on paper. I wrote around it. And two things happened kind of at the same time. The Me Too movement happened and my father passed away. And I think the confluence of those events led me to begin really to think more about writing and to start drafting out what I would want to write. I didn't quite get there. It took me another year, but it was reading those stories that other women wrote and how each story impacted someone else. I really started thinking, okay, you know what? This story can help people because I was so afraid of trauma dumping, but this story could actually help people. And it's been a long time and you've had lots of therapy. So my father was dead, so it was, I thought I can go back and write it. And that was the beginning of the story. And then, I started slowly writing it for the first couple of years.
Did it ever cross your mind, or did you ever attempt to write it as a fictional piece first?
I did, but the voice didn't work. So it just, there were things that I needed to say. And there's parts of the book that are almost unbelievable if they're fiction. I know that sounds crazy, but, we'll get into, but, my father sexually abused me. My mother caught him and went blind. And that's almost, if it wasn't real, it would be unbelievable. So I think that became part of it. As Joan Didion once said, watching a small child smoke marijuana, literary gold. And I think sometimes literary gold, unfortunately comes in nonfiction and becomes harder in fiction. Yeah. And what I realized when I started writing it as memoir, it worked. when I wrote the first chapter of the book is actually the first chapter I wrote.
Okay.
And when I wrote that first chapter, I workshopped it about, 6 or 7 months later, and everybody was just blown off the face of the earth. And I realized it works. I mean,
Yeah.
I never intended it at that point to be the first chapter. That was a process of where to start, but it was the first thing I wrote. So, and in the end, I ended up putting it as the first chapter after moving it around other places.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
As we know, writing is a process.
Yes.
For me, I decided a chronological story was the best story. It was a story I felt most prepared to tell, although obviously there's some looking back, but it was the way that I wanted to write the book. So
I think it was a really powerful way to go through it. And to me, it's interesting because I think there's a denial in fiction and a safety in it when we're confronted with a story. If you were to have written this as fiction, we could easily just say, oh, well, that's just a work of imagination. But your memoir holds up a mirror. It's a life raft, like I said, but it's also a mirror to those people who are denying that this is happening.
And I wanted to do that. And I thought, given my family, where I came from, that it would be really important for me to tell the story. And, one of the things that happened writing the story, and we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about this later, but the gift I got, I started realizing I could do more with this book as I started writing. It started hitting me that I wanted to do more. I wanted to work more in the survivor community. And, if it were fiction, that said, one of the books that influenced me a lot was Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina. That book really influenced me. And she has, before she died, she had said, a long time, she had said that it was autofiction. But that was a different time. And this is, more of a time for memoir. And for me, it just, I don't think it would have held the power that it's held and my ability to really help people without it being memoir.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going through and you realize you want to write this down, your truth, your story, the way it happened to you. And you talked about you felt ready to do it. You've gone through the therapy, but were there really difficult moments? Did you ever face a block? You didn't want to go there. Did you have a way to safely reaccess these memories and these experiences so you could write them down?
Two things. I actually had been working as an attorney and always been that person who's wrote at 5:00 in the morning. I got it right. But I don't have I have this big job and I have to do my job. And I got laid off right before COVID. And I started thinking, well, I'll go back to work, find another job. Then COVID hit, and my husband said to me, you don't need to. If you want to write, just use the time, right? And so I was able to write the book full time. And I also became connected through a workshop with Pam Houston and the Writing by Writers draft program, which was a 2-year program. And it kind of forced me into having to continue writing pages. I was also home, COVID was an unfortunate thing. And I know people who had books come out during COVID, and that was a nightmare for them.
Yeah.
But for me, a lot of people wrote books during COVID, but it gave me that space to I was in in the space where I'm talking to you from, writing all day, and it gave me that time. But yes, it was very difficult. I actually went back I had been out of therapy for a few years, and I ended up finding a therapist because I felt that I needed to have therapy. A couple of years once we were back out in the world, I started really getting into yoga, which really helped me. So I was finding ways to separate myself from the book. It was very hard. There were moments where I said, what am I doing to myself? Why do I want to go back here?
Yeah.
I have a good life compared to, especially a really good life for somebody who's survived the level of trauma that I have, but a good life for anybody.
Yeah.
And I was like, what am I putting myself through this for? But I kept writing.
Yeah. You had a bigger purpose, I think.
Right.
Like you said, your book isn't trauma dumping at all. You can tell you're writing it for other people the entire time, and it's very obvious.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm always happy. I've heard that before, but it's always refreshing to hear because it's, one of the big fears, of course, when you're writing memoir is how it will be received. I mean, this is a very intimate story.
Yeah. Actually, I think you saw on Instagram, I shared a, don't judge a memoir by its cover, judge it by its first sentence. And yours
Yes.
was one of those because that first sentence just makes you sit up straight. I couldn't put it down.
And I wrote it kind of, it reads a little bit like a novel.
It definitely does.
Pacing is novelistic. I think that was my intent too, was to keep it that way. I know a lot of memoirs are very much about self-reflection, and I actually resisted that urge a little bit and had it stay in a more novelistic way. Pam, who I worked with a lot, told me, your readers are very smart. You don't have to explain to them what's going on.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice.
It was really good advice. Yeah.
And it also, I think it helps other people who've experienced this resonate with you more. Mm-hmm. Because it's an invitation as opposed to a very strong declaration of this is exactly, what I felt and how you should feel. And
right.
It was really well done. Brilliant. Finding the title. Now, of course, I know where it came from because I've read your memoir, but did you have a working title as you were?
I actually didn't find it. I can't. Oh! I wish I could say I did because I struggled. I had so many working titles.
You want to share any? Do you want to share any?
Well, Complicit. Then I went with the lucky one, but complicit became I'm not the one complicit. Then people said, well, do complicit with small letters. I had all these titles going forward. I would send my friends titles, my beta readers of people I went to graduate school or people I've known from workshop. And I would send them, what about this? And then they'd send me back something. And I couldn't find it. And when my publisher actually found it, they found a whole bunch of titles and it was no. And it does come from a line in the book, yes. Mm-hmm. And when I sat with it for about 20 minutes or so, I said, yes. Mm-hmm. And then when they did the book cover, they made it, because the book cover, it's called Such a Pretty Picture, but there's little lines through the words, little tiny lines, and it's so perfect. I am grateful to them. So it was my editor and my publisher who found it. So
those people are professionals for a reason, right?
Yes, exactly. They had read the book, and it's from a line in the book. They didn't just make it up. They pulled it from a line where my mother and I are I'm about 10, and I had been sick with pneumonia, and I'd just gotten home from the hospital, and she and I are looking at a picture of me as a baby and her holding me. And my mother sighs and looks at it and says, such a pretty picture. And it is a pretty picture.
I'm getting emotional thinking about that moment right now because it's so strong.
The funny part about my family is we didn't save many photographs of my childhood or young adulthood.
It sort of makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I write about that too, yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't.
Let's get into the memoir. I think it's time. So it starts with a bang, like I said. You're describing your first sexual assault experience. Your father inappropriately touches you when he's bathing you as a young child. You're 4.5, and your mother comes in, witnesses the truth. She sees what is happening, and then she goes blind. She suffers immediate hysterical blindness. Take me through this confusing experience because you have this thing happening with your father, and then your mother comes in, and all of a sudden, what do you feel?
It's funny, when I wrote this scene, I almost went into a hypnotic state. I can recall, this is so burnt in my memory. I knew something was off because my father was breathing really heavily. He's touching me. He took my washcloth away, and it felt strange to me. I was 4.5. I didn't really understand. And when my mother walks in the bathroom, she screamed, and she faints, and he catches her, and wakes blind, as you said. I thought I had killed my mother. I thought I had killed my mother. Yeah. I thought we had killed my mother. I was so scared. And then I didn't really know what blind meant, but there was so much panic in the room and the moment. I was terrified. Terrified. Goosebumps all over. I was standing against the bathtub. I had stood up against the bathtub tiles. Even talking about it, I can feel the tiles on my skin. And I thought we had killed her. And then my father told me that night before he took her to the hospital, he didn't call an ambulance, but he took her, which is, in retrospect, strange and not strange, right?
Manipulative, for sure.
And he told me that it was my fault. What had happened was my fault, which I have learned. It's a common grooming. This
Yeah.
is common grooming.
Yeah. Yeah.
My mother's in the hospital. She's blind. She's in the hospital 2 weeks. And my grandmother's, I have a little sister who's 2.5, two at the time. And she's screaming and tantruming for my mother who's gone suddenly. And I was told I have to be brave. And that became the mantra.
Yeah.
I started believing I had to be brave. I had to be resilient. For a very long time in my whole life, I confused resilience with bravery and silence and toughness.
Yeah.
It was only many years later that I realized that resilience is something else. That resilience is the ability to embrace your trauma and ask for help. But that took a lot of years growing up and a lot of time. At 4.5, I just thought, okay, I have to be good. I have to be brave. I
Yeah.
have to be silent.
That's what being good and brave is being silent. I mean, you have your father shaming you on one hand, and you do through your memoir, you see all of the things that you take on in your life, all of the responsibilities, the burdens, the weights that, quite frankly, you shouldn't have had to take on.
And it is very typical of what children who go through what I went through often have.
Right. Your mother comes home from the hospital and you feel rejected by her. She's doing that thing where she knows what she saw, but she doesn't want to believe it. She doesn't want to look, so she's not seeing. Or you write, most of all, I wanted her to forgive me.
I did. I loved my mother. I really. So it's hard to go back in time before that moment. So much of my life is colored by that moment in time. My memories before that are fragments. I mean, I remember the day that my sister was born.
Okay.
Her coming home from the hospital. She was in a yellow bassinet. I can remember that. I can remember walking with my grandmother, but I don't have that many memories. But what I do know, and my mother taught me to read very young. She told me I don't really remember it. But what I do know is a memory of feeling loved.
Yeah.
I believe so strongly that, my mother loved me. We're going to get into excusing her, I know, a little bit, but I do that a little bit still. But she was really young. When this all happened, she was not even 20, 25, and she had 2 small children. And we learn over time in the book and over time in the life, my father was a hard person to live with. He was a violent, complicated man. Some would say a monster. I would at points have even said that. I try not to write anyone in my book as a monster, even my father, but what he did was certainly monstrous.
Many things that he did, especially to you. But then when you kind of find out background a little bit, I think that there is a bigger conversation that can be had, not just through your memoir, but excusing because of people's past trauma. Why do we allow it to excuse their current behavior? Because not everyone who was abused as a child turns around and abuses their children.
Correct.
You have to have a society that is willing to embrace the trauma along with the person to uplift them.
Correct. And my father was definitely abused as a child. We do find that out in the book, and we find that out in my life. I found that out, but don't know if he was sexually abused.
Right.
And my mother was very young. And still, I think there's a way to uplift and not completely excuse. It's a fine, nuanced line.
Yeah.
You don't get excused for pedophilia. You can't. You don't get a hall pass.
Right.
And my mother doesn't get a hall pass for not protecting. I see this in the work that I do today. I've been around children who've been abused, and their mothers are young, and their mothers are socioeconomically, not wealthy, and some of them are, but their mothers are willing to bring them in to get help to a center, even if they've at their own cost. So I know she could have had the support, but she didn't.
And you never really were able to figure out why.
No, my sister and I can speculate.
It's so fascinating because we want to understand why people make the choices that they make. And it can be really complicated. But as the person who is trying to heal from this, have you had to give yourself some sort of answer that at least has brought you peace? Or have you found peace in the unknowing?
I think it's a combination of both. The abuse went on for a long time. I mean, we're not going to give every part of the memoir away, but maybe it's a truth. And it went on for a very long time. And there were certainly moments where my mother could have acted differently, without a doubt.
And there are moments where you almost feel like she will, and then she doesn't. She doesn't do the thing that you're desperate for her to do, which is to protect you and to believe you.
I don't try to tell her for a very long time, but she also doesn't. She did turn away from me as if she couldn't look at me. And that was really difficult as a young child. And she took her anger out at me too.
Physically, she would slap you. And meanwhile, you're seeing the juxtaposition with your younger sister, and she's not acting this way towards her.
Not my mother. My father wasn't very nice to my younger sister, but my mother was, and she was, she was way more protective of my younger sister in that way. My father was also violent, and I think my younger sister took on more of the violence, strangely enough, than I did.
You took on a different kind of violence.
I took on a different violence.
You write, as an adult, I'd question the hypocrisy of my mother's commitment to peace and civil rights, given the way my parents treated their own children. But at the time, I felt proud of her. You wanted your mother to love you. You wanted her to love you so desperately.
I did. And for a long, long time, maybe a whole life. That's why I feel like it was taken away. And that's the issue, really. It's when love, maybe if the love had never been there, it wouldn't feel so desperate. It wouldn't have felt so desperate to get it back.
Yeah.
But she had it. And there were times she was there for me.
Yeah.
I write about those times, but for whatever reason, she was incapable of doing anything. My mom was 15 when she met my father. My father was 18, and they were very, very young when they got married. She had told me he was the first person that looked at her as something other than pretty. It's hard for me to kind of put together because my father, I don't really view my father as a paragon of feminism by any stretch of the imagination. But
Yeah. And then there's the part when you guys moved to Florida and your mom sees the Confederate flags everywhere and your dad's like, it's fine, just ignore them. And your mom's like, I can't ignore this. And then we're like, but you ignored the bigger thing.
And they both went to like Martin Luther King's march and we marched on, we marched. We were, quite liberal as a family. We were against the Vietnam War. My father had to watch the news. Everybody was, they were very progressive in many ways, but they, when it came to their own children,
they had their secrets. They had their things.
And the secrets were, and that's why nobody would really, from the outside, I mean, that's where we get such a pretty picture. Right. From the outside, the family, my father was a professor. And my mother, although she didn't have an education at the time the abuse first happened, ultimately she would go back to school and become a teacher. And this was a house where books were cherished and talked about, and reading was encouraged, and academic success was expected. And I was still a student who excelled. In second grade, I would cry every day, and she put me in the hallway, and I'd cry. I don't think I put that in the book, but she'd put me in the hallway, and she'd have to take me out to stop me from crying. I would just cry every day in school. My mother kind of pushed back against her because I was reading above grade levels and I got good grades and I did well. So what is she talking about? But I was starting to fall apart. And it was the first time anybody noticed. We moved a lot. So I didn't really have many teachers for very long. But this teacher, her name she's the only person who's not a member of my family whose name I didn't change, because by the time I wrote the book, I figured she was long deceased, but her name was Mrs. Powers, and it was too good.
It was too good, yeah.
It was too good to change. So she tried to tell my mother that I was falling apart because I still got good grades, but I bit my nails down to the quick, chewed my hair
My gosh.
It was clear to the outside that I wasn't doing quite as well as everybody would think.
Right.
My mother told me that people would think I was a mess, crazy, not good. And I overheard my parents talking about this incident when the teacher called them in. And my father said, well, if she continues to, have issues, there are places we can send her.
I know. And I was like, you caused the issue, you bastard, when I'm reading this
And
book.
And that was always the
Ugh.
fear and the underlying threat of my childhood was that,
Right.
I kind of realized that if I told, there were threats. If I told, I would, be put away. And the older I got, and the more I read, the more scared about that I got.
Yeah, of course, of course. Did you have any friends or any outlet at this time in your life that gave you happiness?
My only outlet for when I was little was books.
Yeah.
Reading. We moved so much, and it was really hard to make friends. And I was, not.
You were emotionally distressed.
I was
Yeah.
stressed all the time. Even after Mrs. Powers, I no longer cried in class because I realized that was probably not a good thing. My mother and I realized there'd be no tolerance for that. But I had trouble making friends, but I had my books, and ultimately at around 10, my mother bought me a diary, and it was my first diary. And I realized that I couldn't write my stories, my truth into that diary. So I started making up stories about another girl, a girl named Emily.
Right.
And Emily had a much better family, and she was popular. And I have a terrible singing voice, the worst. And Emily could sing in the choir. I can't. I never
You were
could.
living vicariously through
I
Emily.
had Emily, and I started writing, and I started making stories up, my Emily stories and other stories. I would see other girls along the way, and I would make up stories about their lives. So that was the first that I had. So those were the healthy things. There were some
Yeah.
unhealthy things.
Yeah.
It started young. I started poking myself with the straight edge of pins. I would poke myself, and, eventually later that would lead to cutting.
Yeah. So, like we talked about, we can only attempt to theorize why your mother acted the way that she did, ignored, and your father too. We can only theorize what would lead someone to do this to their child. But one thing that I really appreciated about your memoir is that I think, unfortunately, some people don't understand why children don't come forward about being sexually abused and assaulted. Even like you've spoken about today, you do such a good job of showing the reasons why, the reasoning, the threats, the manipulation. It seemed like you had no other choice but to not bring it up.
Well, you destroy your family. Think about it. As a child, it's your family. That's all you have.
Right.
The idea of destroying your family, and I really believe they would put me away.
Yeah.
Around 11, I started knowing what we were doing was wrong. And I started understanding that my father and our relationship was, what coming to my room every day. And it's all very secretive, right? And
Yeah.
I of course knew it was wrong, but I think it was really hard to understand that I didn't cause it.
Yeah.
That took a long, long time. Even though, of course, by the time I was a teenager, I realized I didn't do this. This was done to me. But being able to intellectualize it and really metabolize it on an emotional level is a whole different thing.
And that makes complete sense. You do talk to a therapist and he intuits what's happening to you. But in order to protect your family, you lie to him.
The story of the therapist always kind of, I was 10, 11, 12. And I was going back about 11, right before my 12th birthday. My father took me shopping and he bought me a dress, and it was a whole grooming moment.
Oh, I know when the sales lady is like, "Oh, aren't you a lucky girl?" And I was just like, "Oh, you have no idea."
It was just this whole grooming moment, which, fathers can buy their daughters dresses.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Machiavellian. In my case, it was. I mean,
Right.
it freaked me out, and I started having nightmares. So my parents sent me to a child psychiatrist, and I never knew why. Did they send me to the child psychiatrist to help me, or was it my my father's Machiavellian kind of way to kind of set up the story that I was emotionally disturbed?
Yeah.
I didn't know. Or was it my mother's way of trying to save me,
Right.
have someone else do what she couldn't do?
Yeah. You have this moment, but at that point you were so conditioned to internalize the shame. And
Yeah.
also, did you really think that he'd believe you?
I didn't know, but I wanted it to stop. Part of this book is my father never penetrated me with his penis. I write that, and he never kissed me. And there was a scene where, in a moment where he started changing the way with the dress, and I got scared we were moving into a new reality. I was older, and
Your body looked different.
my body looked different, and I
Yeah.
got really scared, and I wanted it to end. So I thought if I could tell the psychiatrist just a little bit, that maybe it would stop it. And in some ways it worked. It did work, because he did intuit something. This is 1968, so we have to remember too, things are different. I think at this point, if this exact thing happened today, one would like to believe that a psychiatrist would would report this. But in 1968, it was a different time. And my father was very imposing. I don't ever know what happened when he met with him. My father told me that the psychiatrist told him that I was in love with him, and that was
all your
my fault.
fault.
Yeah. And then afterwards, he left me the Scarlet Letter.
Oh, gosh.
And I read it, and I understood. And I think most of your readers have read The Scarlet Letter, but for those who haven't, it's a story about a woman named Hester Prine, who has an affair with she's married and has an affair, she's very young, with a married pastor. And the end result is she ends up having to he goes off scot-free, and she wears a Scarlet Letter for the rest of her life.
For the rest of her life. I would also like to think that if the situation with Mrs. Powers happened today, that social services would be called in.
I think there might be, although, and that's one of the things I talk about with when I speak publicly is, one of the things that teachers should look for is reactions like that, or a change in behavior. And, a child who's doing something like that, it's indicative of something going on at home.
Children don't cry every day for no reason.
No.
They just don't.
Is it sexual abuse? It's something.
It's something, yeah.
The other thing with the psychiatrist and other people, my father could be quite charming when he wanted to be.
He definitely read like a man who got away with a lot.
We see this a lot.
Yeah, we do see this a lot.
Look at what we're seeing with Jeffrey Epstein, and look at what we see with so many. My father was far from a billionaire, but we're seeing it with rich and powerful men. And he was one of those types of people who he was quite smart and quite manipulative. I would like to think today this wouldn't have happened, but I can't say with any certainty. I was in a new school district every year for years.
So then the assault from your father stops, but then you are raped by 3 boys in the woods.
At the age of 14. And, it's so, there was an earlier incident that had happened at a party. I was with these boys, and they were touching me, and I let them. And, I didn't know how to be. I did not know how to be. I didn't know where I was hypervigilant in so many ways. If a car backfired, I would jump off and I was so hypervigilant to any kind of somebody disliking me. But at the same time, I didn't know where danger ended and safety began. I had no idea.
Well, you write this, which was heartbreaking. You write, although my father had not touched me for over a year, he had trained me well. When the boys touched me, the only thing I knew how to do was stay still and wait for it to be over.
I think for incest survivors or survivors of childhood sexual assault, navigating your sexuality later becomes incredibly complicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had long ago lost any ownership of my body, although ultimately I would take it back in a very kind of a not a very good way. I started confusing control. I realized with a little bit of pot and a little bit of alcohol, I could have sex, and I used that as a way to manipulate men later. So
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have any clue about what my body was, any kind of way to I didn't cherish myself. I was so filled with shame. I thought I was ruined. I thought I was ruined for most of my life. I thought, oh, there is no chance for redemption for me. I've been ruined
Yeah.
at such a young age. And I think about this a lot. I read an article in the New York Times about the sex trafficking here in LA on Figueroa Street. And when I've been reading about the Epstein survivors, I know it's like, there for the grace of God go I. One wrong turn and life could have been so much different, and it was such a struggle, or I could have killed myself. I had suicidal ideation a long time, and I
Yeah.
had it later, but yeah, and then I ended up having to move home with my parents, strangely enough, because I had had a complete breakdown. And it was very difficult, although I will give my mother some credit there. She was kind to me at that point, as kind as she could be. I make it through that particular depression. And I was a nursing student. I graduated from college. I had a degree in nursing. I went to Georgetown, and I ended up going and I became a nurse, and I worked in Arizona. I worked for the Public Health Service for several years and decided then to go to law school. And I went to law school, and I did pretty well in law. I did really well in law school. And I became a lawyer, and in that time period, I had a lot of relationships. I was married a few times. For very short periods of time,
Mm-hmm.
I would get married and then I'd leave, or move in with somebody and then I'd leave. And I couldn't stay with anyone. My intimacy muscle was severed, so to speak. And I could be with people for about a year and a half, and then I would just leave them. I couldn't handle love or connection. So I was going on with my life, doing the best I could from the outside, though, aside from the little marriages, as I like to call them. I looked okay from the outside. I worked at a law firm, and I really, truly believed if I was pretended well enough, and if I was smart enough, pretty enough, kind of perfect enough, I could pretend this abuse away. I could pretend this never happened and have a normal life. I wanted so much to have a normal life. I wanted this dirt that I felt inside to be erased. And I thought if I pretended, it would be gone. But you can't pretend this away. This kind of trauma needs to be addressed. And when I was 33, I was on a subway, and the lights went dark, and a man grabbed my breast on the subway. It was a grope. I even write that I know so many people who have been through gropes on the subway in New York City, unfortunately, as women, the things we have to put up with.
Yeah.
But I had a breakdown. I unraveled. And I started having suicidal ideation again. I was having panic attacks. And I reached a point where I became very aware that I was not going to survive unless I got some help. And I didn't want to die. I did not want to die. So I got some help for the first time. And I had a good therapist. She was a really good therapist, a nice person who told me that I had been assaulted, who
Yeah.
supported me. Eventually, I ended up going into an inpatient program where I got more help. And that's how I started to heal.
Was that the first time at the inpatient facility? Because you write about your experience there and it's incredible. Was that the first time that you ever said those words out loud?
I had talked to the other therapist and told
Okay.
her what had happened,
Right.
but I had never said it in a public setting. I mean, I said it beyond the therapist. I wrote a letter back to my parents that, this is pretty common in therapy. And they said, if you can't talk about it, you have to write a letter and read it
Yeah.
to the group. And I did. And I wrote a letter to my father. And it was the first time I did try to confront my parents before I went in. That was part of the unraveling. They denied it. And they actually even made up another person. It was so crazy.
Right.
My mother,
Right.
only my mother could do that. It's just only my mother. My mother saw the world through it. It's what I've realized. She could only see the world the way that she wanted to see it. And she made up another person we knew. She said, well, it must have been this person.
Yeah, you were confused. Yeah, I remember that part. Yeah. You're unraveling. You know that this thing has happened to you. And for them to invalidate your reality like that.
It was more than I could take.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was it. I couldn't.
Yeah.
It was more than I could. That was the end of I had to go into an inpatient. And I won't talk about all of it, but I had some very tender moments in the end.
Yeah.
And I met somebody who, not sexually, but a man who told me his story. I could go into it a little bit. It's all right. It's a book.
It was such a beautiful moment. And everyone, just go pick up her book, okay? Thank you.
Every once in a while, we meet a person in our life who gives us strength, and they come in a package we never expect. And this person did that for me. And I write about it. And that was the beginning of healing for me. And I continued to get help. But one thing I do say, and I say it in my book and I say it in my life, it wasn't a bug. I did not walk out of the inpatient and healed. I'm perfect. It's taken a long time. I mean, I had a lot of severe trauma. My father abused me for close to 10 years. It's a long time. And with the level of CPTSD that I have, it's taken a long time. But I have healed. And that is my message to other survivors. Yeah. If I can heal, you can heal. But you have to get help. You can't pretend this away.
Since releasing the book or before you got the book published, did you reach out to him? Did you ever find him again? Because the way you leave it in the memoir is like, and then we never talked again. And I had to know.
He died. I did look for him. He was so there were not many people I shared the book with. My sister, of course, before it was published. And although she didn't read it until after, I talked to my niece a little bit about publishing it. So my sister's daughter.
Okay.
My husband didn't read it, although I think he might have ended up reading parts of it because he helped format. But he chose not to read it, which is fair enough. I mean, he knew the story.
Yeah.
I would have reached out to him because the story that I tell in the book is his story and it's quite intimate. But he had died about 10 years before I went to write the book. And he lived his life helping other people. So I thought he would be okay about me telling this. But I never saw him again. There are people that again come into your life, and it was a model for a future. And we didn't have a physical relationship. It was a very pure friendship. And
yeah, it was a soul connection for sure.
It was a soul connection, and I thank him in my heart so much for being. And so you have to read the book to know the story.
But he saw you. He saw you.
He was the first person to see me.
Yeah.
Funny, I was in a yoga. I did the yoga teachers training just to get, not because I want to teach yoga, but because I like to get deep on things.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
When I did it, that was one of the things one of the exercises, what is the time where someone really saw you? And I thought that is the time. I wrote about it already.
That's a beautiful question for all of us to reflect on.
Yeah.
And who do you feel seen by in your life right now?
Now, exactly.
Tell me a little bit about your husband. How long have you guys been married?
25 years. So the intimacy, it will be 25 in September, almost. We've been together for over 25, for almost 26 years, and we'll be married over 26 years together. 25 years we'll be married in September. So.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
So the intimacy muscle is healed.
Yeah.
We have a good marriage. I have a wonderful life. I'm quite lucky, although it took me a long time to get here. And I end the book where I end it. There's an epilogue, but I end when I leave rehab, or program, because it was a rehabilitation place. I end it there, but I have, there's more to say.
Wait, are you teasing a second
Well, I
memoir?
think so. Yeah, I think I've reached the point. In fact, I said that yesterday. I've been on this book tour the book came out in October, and I've been going pretty hard since, and
Yeah.
also speaking a lot about this issue. And I think it's time to sit down and find the page again. I'm really needing it. I've thought about not doing it, but people have asked, and I've started just writing a little bit about it. So I think so. I think there's a whole second part because it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But it happened. But it was never that hard again. I think that's the thing. Even when it was hard again, and there were some definite things that happened along the way, it was never that hard again.
Yeah.
Once I began to shine a light, my own light on what happened, it was never that hard again.
Yeah. Like grief, healing isn't linear. You take one step forward, two steps back sometimes.
Right. And that's why I added the epilogue for that reason.
You already have one customer right here.
Okay, good.
Before we wrap this episode up, let's talk about forgiving your mother and forgiving yourself.
Okay.
You write about the moment as your mother is dying that she finally seems to recognize and take accountability for the pain that she caused you. What was this moment like for you and for all of the younger versions of you?
So, I right before that I made the decision to keep my mother in my life. It's a whole nother discussion. We could go on for another hour.
But it was your decision to make.
I think it's really important that people, when they have survivors in their life, they understand that we get to pick what justice looks like. We get to pick what forgiveness looks like. It's our story, and it may not be what you think you might decide. And I tell survivors that when I talk on podcasts, when I talk to people like you, survivors, you need to get some help, but you get to pick what you do with your story afterwards. You can keep it in a little shell. You can go public. You can forgive. You can go to court. You can do all these different things, but you get to pick, and nobody gets to judge you.
Yes.
For my mother told me that she was sorry 2 weeks before she died. I had forgiven myself for the most part. All of it. I knew it wasn't my fault. Like I said, intellectually. But I always took care of my mother just a little bit. And I always kind of missed. I lost that, unrequited love. My mother was my first unrequited love. And so she apologized to me. I took care of her right before she died. And she told me she was sorry. And I really almost wanted her to stop, to protect her, because she was really frail at that point, really frail. And I let her talk because all of us, my 4.5-year-old me, me as a little girl who just felt so abandoned by her mother and wanted to die. 14-year-old me who was raped. We talked about her, and whose body looked like a roadmap of razor blade cuts. All of those, the older me who was groped on the subway, and all of those iterations of me, and even the me that I was at that moment, because that was really actually I was already almost done with the book. I had finished everything except for this epilogue, and the me that was sitting there as a 65-year-old woman holding her hand. And I finally, I needed to hear whatever it was she had to say, and she needed to say it. I realized that for the first time. So I let her talk. And as I said, she asked me to forgive her. She told me she was sorry. And she said she should have left my father, and she asked me to forgive her. And before that, I had made the decision to keep her in my life, but I had not forgiven her completely. I loved her. Two things are possible. It is possible to have unconditional love. It is possible to keep someone in your life, and it is possible not to fully forgive them. And I had not. But at that moment in time, I listened. I was with my mother when she died, the night she died. Her last breath and my last word to her, I bent down and told her I forgave her. Oh. I forgave her. And I think something released in me too, despite all the therapy. And I had decades of it, and all the internal work I'd done. Certainly I was living a good life, but I had this tiny little kernel of a little girl inside of me who had not quite 100% forgiven herself. And with that, kind of those words, forgiving her, those were gone. And it just freed me. Pam, who I've mentioned a couple times, she worked with me closely. She told me that I wouldn't be ready to fully publish it and I wouldn't be able to write this epilogue. And I struggled with the epilogue. It took me forever. You asked me about roadblock before, but I forgot about the epilogue. So many epilogues, none of them worked. And then when my mother died, I guess, that freed me to write. And I don't think I could have really been able to do the work that I'm doing now with the book and been out here quite as publicly as I have been in the past few years. I've joined the UCLA Rape Treatment Center, where I'm on the board. I'm a volunteer there. I speak so much. I mean, I've been on little TV programs talking about child sexual abuse, not just my story, but the story as a whole of that issue. And I wouldn't be able to be doing this work. It was a little easier that she was gone. It was very hard. Writing about my father, no problem. Writing about my mother was a harder thing. I mean, he was who he was, but our relationship, and in the book, as people read it, it's almost a bigger part of the relationship of the book is healing that wound.
Yeah. I had one question for you when I finished your memoir. What do you have to forgive yourself for?
I don't know if there's anything, but like I said, it was this little kernel. It doesn't have to be intellectually sound.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be emotionally sound. But there was something inside of myself that I had to let go of. So I call it forgiveness. It was just a freeing of the self-blame. Maybe I forgave myself for all the self-hatred and self-blame that I had for so many years.
Yeah.
All the things that I did to myself, because I punished myself a lot for, the shame was so all-encompassing.
Yeah.
I just remember going, okay, this is forgiveness. I felt free.
I think that's a part in your book that women and people who have experienced this will be able to understand in a way that maybe I can't. And that's okay, because like we talked about earlier, this is your journey.
And this question has come up at bookshops, because I've read that part, even though it's the end of the book, it's quite lovely. And I cry still when I read it. And so I read it a lot and it has come up. Some things don't have to be defined. They just are. And for me, it just was.
What do you think the relationship between closure and healing is?
I don't know that you forget full closure. I have a closure. Is it full closure? Like somebody asked me, for example, we talk about healing and forgiveness. And somebody asked me if I forgave my father. And I think I have closure on him, but I don't have forgiveness. And I'm not going to. I've made that decision.
Yeah.
Healing is a process. I think I got another level of closure from the book, from writing the book, and I got another level of voice and empowerment. So, but it's hard for me to say that, that there is full closure on anything ever. It's a big,
yeah.
Even with grief, do we ever close completely? Probably not. So I'm not sure I can answer the question.
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something to ponder, to think about, but I don't know. I do know that the biggest thing I want people to take away from this book is that if a survivor tells you something, believe them.
Yeah.
These stories are real. People don't make this up. And that, for survivors, it's not your fault, but you need to get some help. Here's how I began to heal.
Yeah.
Continuing to heal.
You spoke about talking at these panels and going to bookshops. Do you have any connections that stick out in your mind?
I had this question and somebody asked me, what was the one? And then I gave them like 4. Because there isn't one. It's just everywhere I go, someone comes up to me and tells me, and it's not just women. That's what's really men too.
Yeah.
The number is 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys before the age of 18 will be sexually abused as a child,
Yeah.
there's a lot of moments like that. People come up to me, I worry that the book is too hard or going to hurt, but people telling me that the book has helped them.
That's what it's all about, right?
That's why I wrote the book.
Speaking of, your book doing this for other women, have you been able to read other survivors' books?
Well, I just finished Nobody's Girl, which was really, really poignant and not an easy read, but
No.
a beautiful read. It's so sad that she is not here. Virginia's not here to see what has happened. And Maya Angelou was the first, right, that I read at 14. Okay. I know where the caged bird sings. So I have read these books. I still read them. And I hope mine will give someone else the freedom. I encourage everyone to read it in light of the dialogue that we're all going.
Yeah, it's all part of the same conversation that we need to keep having. We have to keep talking. We have to keep having these conversations, and women like you sharing your stories, especially in such beautiful ways. And you didn't just share your story, you're also donating the royalties of your book.
I am. I mean, look, authors don't make a fortune out of the book. No one's getting rich, but
it's helpful.
So I'm donating 25% to the Rape and Incest National Network, which is the national hotline, and I have the number in the back of my book. I also have resources on my website, and I'm donating the rest a lot to UCLA Rape Treatment Center, but also when I go to a town, for example, if I was hosted in Minneapolis, I donated to a Minneapolis rape treatment center. Whatever I sell at a bookstore, plus usually a little bit more because I can, to a local rape treatment center. I think it's so important to support these hotlines and these centers. This is where people can begin this healing journey. I was very fortunate that I had the money to go to therapy, but not everyone does necessarily. But we at UCLA, we do offer therapy to victims as well as to children at the Stewart House, which is part of the Rape Treatment Center. The children can get up to a year of therapy, which is incredible because it can change the trajectory of their life.
I imagine.
I think all of these hotlines are the first door for people. They can be anonymous. You don't have to tell anybody, but they are the beginning of the healing journey. So we have to do whatever we can to support these organizations. That's my pitch.
I love that. We will link.
Thank you for asking about that.
Yeah, of course. Of course. We will link. I'll link a few local ones and just pick some cities around the United States so people can pick those as well. And I do want to go ahead and share RAINN's National Sexual Assault Hotline with everyone right now. They have 24/7 support in English and in Spanish. You can call 800-656-HOPE, 800-656-4673. They're available to chat online 24/7, or you can text HOPE, HOPE, to 64673. Like Andrea said, take that first step. You are worth it. You are worth it to heal.
And RAINN will get you in touch with something local because they're national.
Perfect. 2 questions for you, and then I'll let you go. My first question I ask all my authors: how do you stay hopeful today?
Gosh, I look at videos of Punch, the monkey online.
I love an honest answer like that. Yes.
I think I get hopeful when people tell me that they've read my book and it helps them. I do a lot of yoga and meditation. These days in particular, it's hard. So I do recommend Punch the Monkey.
We will link Punch.
If you don't know the story, go look. It's a very moving story of a monkey in Japan who found a stuffed friend.
Oh, I love that.
Truthfully, we all have to look for those little ways. Yesterday, I was walking to yoga and I saw a blue jay. And I was like so happy. I said, "Oh, a blue jay," And then I saw a squirrel running up a tree with a little acorn in its mouth. And I said, "Okay, this is it."
Yeah.
It's those little bits. Nature always gives us hope.
That's right. Okay. And then my last question, I pull from the jar. I have no idea what the question will be. Okay. This is interesting that this came up for you. What's a question you wish someone had asked you sooner?
Are you okay?
That's kind of crazy that came up for you.
I mean, as a child, it would have been nice for someone to ask me, not my parents, in an empathetic way. I wish somebody had taken me aside and said, I see that you're struggling. I'm here to help you. Yeah. And are you okay? So for me, it's a pretty simple one.
Andrea, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Alec. I really this was a lovely conversation, and I appreciate your time. Thank you to all the listeners for listening to my story.
And we will link how to buy Andrea's book, Such a Pretty Picture, in the show notes, and you can find it on my bookshop.org website. And everyone out there, thank you for listening and take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you all so much for bearing witness to Andrea's story today. If you would like to further support the show, you can find us on Patreon or Apple Podcasts. Subscribe there for extended episodes and bonus content. We also have some really cute merch at TeePublic. We have a special treat coming up for you. Our first Friday fiction episode drops this Friday. The incredible New York Times bestselling author Kate Quinn joins me. We have a fantastic conversation, how she finds inspiration and the women's memoirs that she's used in researching her fantastic historical fiction novels. Until then, take care.